Good morning.
Uh,
How was your weekend?
Fine,
That's cool.
good. As y'all shuffle in, update your stocks for today now that the markets are open. If you have questions on the marginal tax homework, I'll answer those now. And last week on Friday, everybody should have updated their stock projects according to that day's market prices and given me a little bit of a write-up about how your week went in trading. We're going to do that every week as we go along from now on, just so that you have to reflect back on how your prices changed, what stuff was good, what stuff was bad. And at the end, of course, we'll do a larger analysis of how much money we made or lost as this whole project went along. Okay. Also, part of today's talk will be a little bit about today we're going to talk a little bit about a new vocab term in terms of investing, and Sabrina is going to have to update her project in a way that none of the rest of y'all will be able to, because some good stuff happened to her portfolio. Sabrina, are you on?
Yeah.
You own shares of Domino's, correct?
Yes.
How many shares do you own of Domino's?
5.
Oh, okay. I guess it won't matter that much. It'll matter a little bit, but not too much. So just so y'all know, Domino's is doing really well right now. If you've been tracking their business, even though, you know, we're in the middle of the great COVID-induced market crash, they're actually hiring people because now that nobody can go to restaurants, takeout restaurants are killing it. They already had a really good supply chain for getting takeout orders out the door and out to people's houses. So even though most people are being laid off or furloughed right now, Domino's is actually hiring new employees to meet their new demand, and their sales are up almost 10%. So last week on Tuesday, they paid out dividends to all of their investors. Are y'all aware of dividends or what that means?
No.
Dividends are straight up cash payments to investors. So normally stock prices go up, stock prices go down, and that's just a reflection of the company's current valuation, right? How much money financial experts say that they're worth in total. That's like their assets plus their actual ability to manufacture. All of the assets that a company has in total, then divided up by the number of shares available, gives you an idea of what your stock value is, right? When a company is doing really well, one thing that they'll do, and they're incentivized to do this by the way that taxes work, is a dividend payout, where they're like, hey, instead of like retaining this money, we're just going to pay it back out to our investors because that's why you invested in us. So last week on the 21st, Domino's declared a dividend. And again, this is because their business is doing so well, right? So on 2/21, Domino's paid out a 0.65 cent dividend. And sorry, you said you had 5 shares, right?
Yes.
So you're going to do 5 times 0.65 because it was a 65-cent dividend per share. And so to your cash on hand, that'll be 5 times 0.65. You earned a whole $3.25 from investing. So go ahead and add $3.25 to your cash on hand because Domino's paid you a dividend. How about that?
That's so interesting.
It's literally interest. So yes, it is interesting. Yeah, so every now and then you'll get a dividend payout from a stock, which is literally just cash given to all of the shareholders, and it's a certain amount of cash per stock. So the more stock you had in the company, the more money you would have gotten from this dividend payout. Is that okay?
Yes.
Oh, and I should also mention that technically this would be taxed. So dividend payouts are not long-term investment gains, they're short-term investment gains, and short-term investment gains are taxed like income is. So this would also be hit with regular income tax, which for you, a high schooler who probably has no other sources of income, all of that's going to fall underneath that first 10% bracket. So if you actually had 5 shares of Domino's and you actually got this $3.25 dividend payout, it would have been, they would have removed 32 cents from it before they gave it to you. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to update my stocks because last week I was expecting a market crash. So I actually sold all of my stocks in my little spreadsheet just to lock in my cash value that I had on hand. So my portfolio is at $10,625, and I'm not going to be reinvesting it for a few days. I'm actually going to wait for stuff to go lower, and then I'm going to repurchase a bunch of stuff from the market. Everybody else, so do y'all have any questions on your stock projects where we stand right now?
Do you
Nope.
mind if later on in the day, like, we update the stock again?
Yeah, you can do that. In reality, like how this stuff works is that like I open up my Robinhood app and I just look at it and it tells me how much money I've lost or gained since I woke up.
Yeah.
So yeah, technically the way that you should think about this stuff is that all of these stock values are constantly ticking up and down. So if you ever want to re-update them at some later point in the day because one of your stocks had a big movement, feel free to do so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then you'll notice that I posted a marginal tax rate homework problem that had 3 more scenarios. Are there any questions about those scenarios before we move along with what we're talking about today? I think they were all.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what's up?
So for the bracket part all the way on the left, is that wherever we put how much the investment, how much the people make that year, or no?
When you are done, you fill out the brackets from the bottom to the top. So if you're looking at the regular income tax bracket,
Okay.
yeah, if you're looking at the regular income tax bracket, and you're filing as single, that first tax bracket is $0 to $9,700. No matter how much money you are making, the first $9,700 goes into that tax bracket and gets taxed at that rate.
So all of these scenarios are still gonna have 0 to 9,700.
That is correct, and that's important to understand that all people who file income tax in this country, they are all taxed at the same rate for that first $9,700. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I finished all of mine, and I think I did it right. Like, I asked my dad a few questions about the not the inheritance, the stock one. Like, he had a long-term thing. I kind of got confused on that. But when
So
you
for
check
that
it, you'll
one,
obviously.
yeah, I'm gonna check them. So I already have the solution Excel sheet for it made. I'm just gonna check your final taxes paid against those.
Okay.
And the interest one was, that's why I gave you 2 links to 2 different tax brackets, one on regular income and then one on capital gains. That first situation, I think it's a married couple, right? Where one of them works and then the other one has an investment.
Yeah.
For that investment money, you are looking at the capital gains tax rates. So from 0 to 40,000, it's 0%. From 40,000 to 434,000, it's 15%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so long-term capital gains are taxed differently than regular income.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions out there about the marginal tax rate homework? And like, if you did it wrong, don't worry, just do your best on it, get it in on time. And then after I check them off, if you got one of them wrong, I'll let you know and you can redo it and submit it whenever you have time for full credit. Okay, so this week we're gonna do our last week of regular business topics. And this week, we're kind of gonna hit on the one that's gonna impact you most directly. So when it comes to the tax stuff, I just want you to understand how much taxes are paid and what that stuff is used for. That's just good to know for your brain, right? Um, and investing in the stock market or investing in general is something you can do once you have excess money, but that probably won't come until after you are done with school, have your career, and also on top of that, have a few years dumped into your career so that you can, have that cash on hand to reinvest, unless you have an inheritance or whatever that you are learning how to invest. But the financial topic that's going to hit you most soon is what? Take a wild guess.
Student loans.
Precisely. And not just student loans, because in understanding student loans, that falls into a broader category of other financial products that you might find yourself dealing with soon. But consumer debt in general, just like how is debt structured? How does this stuff work? And again, I'm gonna avoid telling you my opinions on the topic, just because that's not useful, despite what I think about the way that debt is structured or the rules, blah, 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 blah. You still have to deal with it because we live in a world where these products exist. Though I will try to give you a little bit of personal advice on this stuff, like what to avoid, what's probably fine. But for the most part, kids, when it comes to debt, the answer is you probably want to avoid going into this type of debt if you can. Today we're going to talk about consumer debt, what it is, how you want to think about it, how to calculate what it will actually cost you. Consumer debt. And the reason why I say consumer debt is that the way that debt acts for consumers, which you are, if you are a person who purchases products, you are a consumer. This is structured fundamentally different than corporate debt or other types of entities which can acquire debt. A big part of a company being a company is the fact that they acquire this legal status called an LLC, a limited liability corporation, which makes it so that if something bad were to happen to the company and the company were to go bankrupt, it only affects the company and not the owners. So if a business were to go under, like a large LLC, the financial responsibility for who is now going broke cannot reach out of the company and touch the personal bank accounts of the people associated with the company. It can only touch the bank accounts of the company itself. All of this type of debt that we're going to be talking about, this is the bad kind of debt where if you don't pay this back, the bank can come take your stuff. Like if you don't pay back these specific types of debt, for certain classifications of this stuff, if you don't pay back your car loan, your car can get repossessed. So a dude comes and legally steals your car in the middle of the night. And for these other types of debt, if you don't have the cash on hand to pay them back and you go under a certain amount of being behind on it, the government can either garnish your wages, which means that they can take a cut of your paycheck before you do, right? So if your wages are being garnished, the government basically tells your employer that they're like, hey man, before you give this paycheck to your employee, you actually have to give us 15% of it first, and then the rest goes to the employee because they're paying back some debt. Or the worst one is if you have real assets, if you have real estate like land, or you own businesses, or you own valuable property, like you have a known set of collectibles, like people who have jewelry or sports memorabilia or whatever, all of that stuff can be repossessed by the government in order to pay off your debts if you fall behind on this stuff, which is why it's important not to fall behind on this stuff. What kinds of consumer debt are y'all aware of? I heard one at the top. The one that all of you are probably about to acquire in the very near future.
Student debt.
Student debt. Student loans. Okay. And I'm going to hit this one with an asterisk because there are some things about student loans that are different from these other ones that I am going to warn you about. What is another type of consumer debt, a debt that a person will commonly go into?
House loans,
Sorry, what was that?
home loans.
Yeah, a home loan, which is a big one, and I would consider this one of the few good kinds of debt. A home loan, also referred to as a mortgage.
What about car loans?
Auto loans, also a type of debt. Auto loans are a little bit different. I don't think auto loans are worth going into. I always pay off my cars as quickly as possible because the interest on them sucks, and the amount of money that you need to pay off an auto loan isn't that much if you're buying reasonable cars. Like at the point that you're buying a regular car, 30, 40, 50,000, I think you're better off financially to just like pay it off as soon as you can. And then if you are into high-end cars, you might as well never own it and just lease it and trade it in when you get bored with it. We'll talk about auto loans and how to calculate what the over-under is for all of the different types of ownership that are available. There's another big one here, and these were the four that I was planning on talking about. So what else do we need to put here? The most common kind of debt, the one that just lives in your wallet.
Credit card.
Yeah, credit card, that's the one. Credit cards. Yeah, that's the other big one. And so we're going to talk about these four products and some like fine details about them. Not that any of this is like professional financial advice. I just want you to be aware about some of the common differences between these things. And top disclaimer, everything that I'm about to say is a generalization. The exact rules about every single one of these products is going to differ as you go from company to company, product to product, country to country where the product is available. All of this stuff can vary greatly. So whenever you get one of these products, it's important that you both read the documentation that comes with it fully, like top to bottom, front to back, read every word. And if something is not understood, ask the person who is providing it to you. Keep in mind that if you ask the person who is providing you with the product, like if you go to a bank and you're like, hey, give me a credit card, you know that they're going to answer every single one of your questions in a way to push you towards agreeing with that product, right? So if you are going to be looking at a debt product, it's really important that you take that stuff to a third party, like go to one of your parents, probably, who is a little bit more financially literate than you are, and ask them what the deal is with this thing that you are agreeing to. Or again, for honest, frank financial advice, the best place to go is always a fiduciary, but you know that requires usually paying that person for their advice. But paying a little bit of money upfront can save you tens of thousands of dollars in the long run. Now, the reason why these three down below all have dashes on them is the fact that for all three of these, you can declare bankruptcy. Now, there are different types of bankruptcy, and the way that bankruptcy works is always going to be different based on the type of bankruptcy declared. If you ever get to that point in your life, you will probably be talking to a lawyer about how exactly it is that you will be declaring bankruptcy. But the reason why I bring it up now is that I want you to know that you cannot declare bankruptcy on a student loan. And this is due to a law that was passed, I believe, in 2000 or 2001. Student loans are legally exempt from bankruptcy. So does anybody out there have a vague notion of what bankruptcy is? And I don't mean corporate bankruptcy, I mean like personal bankruptcy.
You lose all your debt, and then there's something for collateral usually.
Yeah, so you lose all your debt, but you also lose all your assets typically, or you at least lose enough assets to make up for the debt. Yeah. So if you ever fall so behind on a home loan, like you purchase a house and I don't know, that city that you bought the house in happens to be Detroit, so the house is now worth nothing, and so there's no point in paying back the mortgage anymore. Or you finance a supercar and you destroy that car and the insurance can't pay for it, and therefore you are no longer going to be making payments on the car itself. Or the big one for people your age, and this isn't like me just being mean, this is borne out by statistics, the number one type of crippling debt that young people face is credit card debt. You simply fall behind on payments, or you have some kind of emergency that you have to put on a credit card because you don't have the money in your checking account to pay for it. And so you cannot pay off that credit card and you declare bankruptcy. you declare bankruptcy on your debt. And so all of these types of debt will go away, more or less. And if you own anything real, they'll take it away from you. They'll take your house if the house is in your name. They'll take the car if the car is in your name. They'll seize money from your accounts if those accounts are in your name. And then the debt will be forgiven and you'll also own nothing. However, no matter what happens to your student loans, no matter what, you declare bankruptcy, you're still responsible for paying back your student loans forever. I guess the semi-logic of it is, though I think it's heinous and wrong, is the fact that like they can't repossess your degree. They can't be like, hey, you quit paying back these loans, but you already got the education. We're going to take your degree away so you can't get a job with it. But towards the end of the 90s, when school started getting expensive, which it hadn't even gotten all the way there yet, not really, but school was just starting to get expensive, a bunch of people were finishing school, graduating, and then immediately declaring bankruptcy, because honestly, at the time in the 90s, it was probably the right decision for those people. Simply because if you have no assets, if you own nothing, they can't take anything away, right? So you're at zero, you declare bankruptcy, you're still at zero, you no longer have to pay off the student loans, and past that, there's really only one penalty associated with declaring bankruptcy. Are y'all aware of what that penalty is for declaring bankruptcy?
Doesn't it destroy your credit score?
Yes, it annihilates your credit score, which is where this talk has to begin. It destroys your credit score, and as a result, you cannot take out any sorts of loans. You can't do anything else without it being at some horrific interest rate. But if you just graduated from college, right, you're like 21 or 22, typically declaring bankruptcy destroys your credit for about 7 years. So that means from 21 to 28, you can't purchase anything with a large amount of debt. But to be honest, who cares? Because at that age range anyway, especially with the world being the way it is now, you can't purchase anything big anyway because you don't have money on hand to do so, so who cares? I think some of those people who declared bankruptcy on their student loans right at the end of the 90s got like a pretty good deal in exchange for that. Of like, hey, technically you can't do anything with big debt for 7 years until 2006 or 7, but you weren't going to be able to do that anyway, so who cares? Just big forewarning to those of you about to sign off on big student loans. This right here, you can't declare bankruptcy on it. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get into our talk now on consumer debt. And this must begin with the credit score. And I can't give you an equation for this part because the equations which are used to calculate credit scores are kind of secret and definitely proprietary. Have you all heard the word proprietary before? Have you all heard the word proprietary before? It's a yes or a no?
No.
If information is proprietary, that means that that information is owned by a company, which normally means that it is kept secret, or in order to use it, you have to pay a fee to that company. So there are different companies that calculate your credit score. The main three are Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. These three credit rating organizations all rate your credit a little bit differently. They all use slightly different scales, but for the most part, they're interchangeable. So the credit score given by one company will more or less be within line. Like, it's like comparing the SAT to the ACT. Technically, they're different tests. They're on different scales, but the meaning of the score is the same. You could take one score and interpret it in another score's scale.
Mr. Rob?
Yes.
What's a FICO score then?
FICO?
Yeah, for the credit card thing.
Oh, fun. So your FICO credit score is all three. If you have the FICO like app on your phone or whatever, it'll show you what all three of your credit scores are live.
Yeah, because my thing, the credit card, they have an app for American Express and they give FICO scores instead of like the individual ones.
Yeah, yeah. So that's just going to be an aggregate of all three: the Equifax, the Experian, and the TransUnion. The FICOs will look at all three. So yeah, in terms of your credit score, what the credit score as an idea is trying to capture, the whole thing that it's looking at is it is a rating of how reliable you are as a borrower. So how good at you are taking out debt, how much money do you make the companies that you borrow money from? And the credit score is important because it determines two things. So this determines your credit cap. So how much money are you allowed to borrow total? And that's really important to have a higher credit cap, because if you never have a high enough credit cap in order to purchase a house, you cannot purchase a house. You need to be able to borrow enough money in order to get a home loan, right? In order to purchase a house, because if your credit cap is like $8,000, then you can borrow enough money from the bank to deal with an emergency or whatever. But $8,000 really purchases nothing these days. The other thing that oh yeah, Jack, you had a question?
Yeah, what's the highest we could have a credit score?
Credit score scales are all basically the same. They go from about 300 to 850. I forget, one of these goes to 850, the other two go to 800. They're all really similar, but the same way how you can take an ACT score and convert it to be comparable to an SAT, you could take any one of them and convert it to be comparable to the other two. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. It determines your credit cap. And the other thing that it determines, is it straight up determines interest rates. Oddly enough, we live in a world where if you are better at borrowing money, you get to pay less in order to borrow that money. The better your credit score is, the lower the interest rate will be that you can be offered on various loans or various financial products. So here's just like a sample or whatever. Right now, through Chase, they have a bunch of different credit cards, but for you, their basic credit card, the like high schoolers beginner credit card, is the Chase Freedom Card. The Chase Freedom Card has an interest rate of anywhere from 14.99% if you have a perfect credit score, all the way to 23.74% if you have a bad credit score. Good, bad. Which is a pretty big difference. And you have to keep in mind that these differences are non-linear. So even though these two are different by about 8%, that does not mean you will end up paying 8% more if you have the worst interest rate. You will end up paying way more than 8% more over the lifetime of that credit card if you have that higher interest rate, if you have a bad credit score. So here are the types of things that go into calculating your credit score. And I've complained about this before, but this isn't super straightforward how this is calculated, because it's based on your human behavior. And here are the amount to which different types of behavior go into calculating your credit score. So your credit score, so here are your factors in your credit score. Factors in your credit score, the main one is payment history. Missing payments is really bad for your credit score. Missing a payment and having a penalty assessed against that missed payment will instantly drop your credit score. And depending on what your bank is, they might allow you to track your credit score live or daily or whatever. that company, Intuit, that does TurboTax, usually if you are a member of their service, on top of using their platform to do your taxes at the end of the year, they'll also tell you what your credit score is at the end of every week. This stuff is useful, but yeah, missing one payment on a loan can instantly drop your credit score. The total amount borrowed, grand total, over the last 10 years and how much you still owe, that's about 30%. Past that, the other thing that determines your credit scores are the length of your history. So right now, all of y'all are young. If you just turned 18, you are kind of just beginning your adventure through the world of debt and paying back debt. So the length of your history is really short. No matter what, this is going to be a ding against you, which means nobody starts off with a perfect credit score. It's just not possible. New credit is 10% of your credit score. And then types of credit. Is that other 10%. So here's how you want to think about these things and how they all factor in to determine your credit score. Never miss a payment. That's probably rule number one. As long as you have debt and you never miss a payment, you are always making at least minimum payments on everything, or even better than that, a little bit higher than the minimum payment due. That will gradually increase your credit score over time. Number two, the amount of money borrowed also increases your credit score. They're not going to let you start off by buying a house first thing. They want you to start off with a credit card and put groceries on it or whatever and learn how to pay all of that debt back. And as you do that, you slowly get to borrow more and more and more and more and more and more money until you can eventually buy a car. After you borrow the money to buy a car, they learn that you can, you succeeded at borrowing thousands of dollars. If you can finance a car and pay it back, they know that you can finance tens of thousands of dollars. And then after you do that, your credit score will likely be in a place where you could then finance hundreds of thousands of dollars to purchase a car. It requires that you start at the bottom and slowly level your way up until you can purchase the things in life that are actually worth purchasing. The longer your history, the more establishable financial history you have. And specifically, the longer you spend working, like if you have a long career showing that you have stable income over long periods of time, this will also increase your credit score. And this just kind of happens inherently over time. This is also a weird one. If you have a completely stagnant credit account, your credit score will stop going up in general. So if you have one credit card and that's all you have had for a long, long time, you will get to a point where making payments on that credit card and borrowing money on that credit card will stop increasing your credit score. And they want you to either then obtain another credit card, which is why most adults usually have multiple, so that they can increase their credit score before making a big purchase. And the other thing that affects it is the type of credit that you have. Certain types of debt will lower your credit score. Certain types of debt will increase your credit score. So having a bunch of mortgages isn't good unless you have the revenue to match it. So they don't want to see that people are buying houses to rent out and then using that rental money to buy more houses. That is extremely precarious, and a bunch of people are finding that out the hard way right now. There are a bunch of people in the area who buy a house to put it on Airbnb, and then they use the money from Airbnb to pay off the house. They charge a little bit more than what the house costs month to month, right? And so they make a little bit of profit off of it that way. But guess what's happening to all those Airbnbs right now? What happens to hotels when there's a global pandemic?
They're closed.
They are closed. So if you have an Airbnb, if you have a house that you own as a rental property and you are renting it from month to month, all of those houses are not being rented out right now because people aren't traveling. So a bunch of people who bought houses just to turn them into tiny hotels through Airbnb, if they can't pay them off, they're about to lose their mortgages. I predict that you are about to see a bunch of cheap houses go up on the county repossession website, which if you don't know, once a house gets repossessed, you can buy it for cheap directly from a bank or whatever on these weird online auction sites. I guarantee a bunch of houses are going to be repossessed by people who thought that they were going to get rich off of Airbnb. A type of credit that can be good because it's not typically precarious, oddly enough, is student loans. Mostly because the studies show that if you go to college and you have that degree in hand, you earn more money. And if you earn more money, you tend to have a higher credit score. So student loans, having one of those is actually, in some cases, depending on the way that the math bears out in the end, it can be positive for your credit score because it's a type of debt that indicates that you will make more money over the course of your lifetime than somebody who doesn't have that kind of debt. Is this okay? Are there any questions up through here? No, okay. So let's go ahead and talk, now that we've talked a little bit about credit scores, about how it is that we calculate our payments. And the odd thing here is that the details of how these types of debt are paid back they all use the same equation. But the calculation is piecewise. This means that you must necessarily calculate this month to month in order to get the big picture. There's really no other good way to calculate, like, hey, I take out this much money to go to college. How much money am I going to have to pay for it back? I could give you simple rules of thumb for that stuff, like the fact that most people who take out student loans end up paying double on average to pay all of it back. But the amount of money that you pay back, the only way to know for sure, is to calculate it month to month using the compound interest equation. And you do that all the way until the loans are paid off, and you add all of that up, which is a thing we can do in Excel. However, in general, here is like the rule of thumb for how this stuff is done. The faster you pay it back, of course, the less you pay in total. The converse of this is also true. The slower you pay it back, so if you're only making minimum payments from month to month, then the longer it's going to take to pay all of your debt back. The other thing that's really weird here is that paying debt back too quickly can hurt your credit score. So be very careful, because this fact right here, the fact that the faster you pay stuff back, the less you pay in total, this, depending on the situation, can negatively impact your credit score. So be careful with that. Oh, I also want to mention one other thing before we get to the math. Your credit score, once you have a way into it to monitor it, I do recommend you do that, because the monitoring of your credit score is one of the simplest ways to protect your identity from being stolen. Now, I'm not saying that it's like guaranteed. There's like literally no way to guarantee that somewhere out there someone hasn't like broken into your email and is using that to pretend to be you for whatever reason. But usually if somebody's going to steal your identity and use it for a scam or whatever, it's usually some sort of credit scam. Like somebody takes out a credit card in your name, or somebody uses one of your debit accounts to pay off one of their own loans. And that will almost immediately reflect in your credit score. Like if you open a new credit card and your credit score is good, it'll increase your credit score. If your credit score is bad and you open a new credit card, it'll drop your credit score. And that shows up like as soon as the paperwork is processed. So it is worth monitoring your credit score, not obsessively, not like minute to minute, but pop in on it once a week or so, just in case somebody is messing around with your identity. That's one of the quickest ways that people are usually notified that their identity has been stolen, unless they pay for a service that monitors that stuff for them. Okay, So all of these types of debt are bound by the compound interest equation, which is where we'll stop for today. And so here is the compound interest equation. Compound interest. The compound interest equation is as follows. The total amount of money that you have in an account. So your current A, account value, is going to be equal to P, the principal, which is just the initial amount of money borrowed, multiplied by 1 plus R divided by N raised to the N multiplied by the T. So this is to say where A is the APR, which is a common phrase that you hear thrown around in financial products. This just means the annual percentage rate. So over the course of 1 year, how much money are you going to have to give to the bank in exchange for them letting you borrow money? So this is pure profit given back to the bank in exchange for their loan. And this is the percentage calculated over the whole year. The reason why this stuff is harder to think about is the fact that that interest is broken up over the course of the year, right? Which is why we need the number N, where N is the frequency of compounding. And to be honest with you, there is only one frequency that you ever actually deal with in real life, unless you get into actual like investing in long-term products. The frequency of compounding is almost always monthly, which is to say N is equal to 12 monthly. I don't know what the deal is with your parents and their holdings, but yo, my credit card is monthly, my student loan is monthly, our mortgage is monthly. Every single type of debt that we have is structured as some sort of monthly payment. The only time that you might deal with some sort of other investment is that certain people have these long-term investments in the stock market called CDs. We have one of those and it compounds quarterly. Guess what N is if it compounds quarterly? If something compounding monthly means N is 12, guess what quarterly is?
Every 4.
Yeah, so that means N is equal to 4 because it compounds 4 times a year at the end of the business quarter. And then the last thing, T, is time, but
Wait, didn't
measured
you
in
say
years.
quarterly, Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
Wait, for 12, wouldn't quarterly be 3, not 4?
N is the number of times that it happens a year. So a quarter is 3 months long, but a quarter happens 4 times a year. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. And then T is the time measured in years. However, I'm going to go ahead and warn you that this calculation is absolutely meaningless. This means nothing. This contains no value. Meaningless for times greater than 1/12 if you are making payments. And this is what we'll get into tomorrow. This is why this is so hard to understand. When we teach you guys this equation in pre-cal, we only give scenarios where you're never touching the principal. We're like, hey, you put money into an account and it makes 4% interest. How much money do you have in 10 years? That's really easy, right? That's a really easy calculation. It's literally plug and chug. However, if you have some sort of debt and you're making a monthly payment on it, you cannot use this equation in order to calculate what the total amount of money paid out is going to be, because every single time you make a payment, payments can change your principal value from month to month. if you make a payment on a credit card, right? If you owe $20,000 because you used your credit card to pay for some emergency that occurred, right? The interest calculated is going to be calculated off of that $20,000, right? But let's say that that month you put your entire paycheck into it. So you pay off $4,000 of it, and now you have a principal on there of $16,000. The next month, when your interest is calculated, the P that the bank plugs into this equation, when they tell you how much money you owe, it is going to be based off of that new number. So if you owe somebody money and you just pay off of it, you just pay it all off at once, all of this will go straight to zero. And any long-term calculation made using this equation is thus rendered meaningless. The most complicated thing about figuring out how debt will be paid back and about how debt is structured is the fact that every time you make a payment, you can shave off some of that principal, which will change what the payment looks like in the following month. That means that this is a perfect case for Excel, right? Because if you need to do the same sort of tedious little fiddly calculation again and again and again, we're not going to do it by hand. Instead, we're going to make a computer do it. So when we come in tomorrow, we're going to start digging through the details of these. I have a lot to say about credit cards. I have a little bit to say about home loans and auto loans, and I have a lot to say about student loans. We're going to look at how the compound interest equation applies to those four, and how you should think about the way that your debt is structured when you are offered those products. Are there any questions on what we talked about today? No? Be sure to update that stock project, and past that, the only homework you have is the marginal tax rate homework. Be sure to wrap that up and get it uploaded as soon as possible. I'll be grading those and making sure that both the equations work and that you get the correct answer. Just do your best and get it uploaded, even if it's a little bit confusing, because if you get it in on time and you miss points, of course, you'll be able to fix those sheets for full credit. You all have a nice day, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.